This is a small screencast to help you understand what are the standards and requirements for the Part 1 assessment. So this is going through some past papers that other students have done in the past. This particular set of examples is from the assessment case used a couple of years ago, which we now use for teaching capacity and demand and inventory. So it's the cake manufacturer case study. So you will be becoming more aware of that. So this is also useful for you in terms of when you come to that seminar activity. So this particular ITO is unfortunately this is a failed one due to a number of reasons. So this is poorly laid out for starters, and it tends to just be a list, and quite a narrow list when you look at it. So that is not an acceptable piece of work for a university degree course. If we move on a bit further, this particular example, we can zoom in a little bit, it has more detail, but it is just a list. There's no discrimination necessarily about what those things are. So it's kind of appropriate, but not enough. Would be on the borderline between a pass and a fail, and it's quite hard work to produce for little value. So what you're looking for is not just a list. This is a bit more discriminatory, so there's some categorization of inputs and some things that are actually quite useful to the business, for example recipes, stock reports, etc. Customers, in this case customers is incorrect because it's not like a retail business where customers are flowing through the factory, so it's mindful about it might be that a customer is not necessarily appropriate to the type of business that you're being assessed in. If you look at the output, it's very descriptive, and there is an attempt to categorize the products, although it's quite small. And the transforming resources, it's quite hard to understand what they are. It's a bit vague. So again, not a great piece of work. If we look at this one, this is a slightly better piece of work in the sense that there is a bit more clarity. The list, there's some categorization of the goods, services less detail, and the facilities and staff. That's quite a relatively concise list. Could be been more concise, and that enables them to think about what the transforming resources are, such, for example, market research, the machinery, the recipe designs, etc. So it's getting better, okay, in terms of that particular piece of work. They could have done better at categorizing the inputs. Okay, so they've got like customers in the same group as pest control, which would be not ideal. If we move on, so this is a much better piece of work, a more kind of like succinct description of the facilities and staff. So for example, you've got skilled production workers, you've got the supervisors, you've got the types, so it's categorization is important. Same with the inputs. If you look at the goods and services, so there's an attempt to separate products and services, so a good summary of the types of products, and an attempt here for thinking about the service aspects. Could do more there. If you think about the often businesses have equal amounts of goods and services, even those that don't necessarily offer a service product, but it's connected to the product. Transformation process, there's some interesting things in there, like the hazard control points for standards, various different things. So there's a range of activities there. It could be better compared to the one that we looked at previously. Again, here this is a much better description of the services. So there's things about websites and delivery orders, batch coding, the things that the customer is using. Okay, so the ITO is probably the most difficult aspect to get right, because it's trying to encapsulate the whole business on one diagram. So it sounds simple, but to do well takes quite a lot of research and takes quite a lot of thinking about how you capture those things. And this one, for example, the transformation resources are kind of okay, but could be improved. And here they're separated staff and facilities. So the more discrimination and categorization, the clearer the diagram is, and the more able you are to see the key aspects. Where the marks are is in this transforming resources section and the goods and services there, where often people don't do as well as they could do. Finally, we'll look at this example, and you can see here that there's quite a good amount of information in there. It's not just data, it's been categorized. There is a really good aspect in terms of the services. So talk about the insurance, about free from hydrogenated fats. Some things are generic, so this is all products made to customers' requirements. So that you could phrase that better. You say, well, actually, that's a kind of customization to the customer's recipe, for example. So it has to mean something in that context. The more you say it how it is, the better it's going to be in terms of an output for your piece of work. If we move on to process maps, if you look at the report writing video, it's best to do that in PowerPoint, and then to cut and paste it into Word, or you can do your whole report in PowerPoint. Part 1, that's okay as well. This is an extremely poor process map. This is a fail. That probably took that person a matter of minutes to do that. It's not a university standard piece of work. A graduate would get kicked out of the office if they came in with that for a piece of work. This is a slightly better one, so there's a bit more layout to this. If you think about a good diagram, it's like a good piece of grammatical text. The clearer it is, the more we can see the meaning and the more worthwhile it is. So this is okay. It's a little bit confusing as to the flow, as to what goes where. It kind of meanders about the page a little bit, and there's a reasonable amount of detail. This one, there's more detail, but it is less clear. There's some attempt at colour coding, but there's no kind of key as to what those colours might mean. Not so good. And this person would have been better off laying out on 2 pages and spending a little bit more time trying to get right in their head on post-it notes the actual flow, because it's a bit overwhelming. If you took that to a business and said this is your process, well, actually it can't be that. It wouldn't work if it was that complicated. So it needs to be simplified in terms of what actually happens. So this is a good example, this next one, about somebody that's done that. So they've taken their time and laid it out over 2 pages. Okay, slightly less detail than possibly they should have. So it's probably kind of high 50s, and it could be the bigger picture is less clear. You know, there's no use of colour. It's kind of like not quite clear the overall flow. Whereas this one, for example, you can clearly see the different areas. You've got a reasonable amount of detail, and it has been laid out such that you can see the high level flow from production, from raw ingredients down to baking, etc. That's really useful, and there's some use of symbols there in terms of telling the type of process step that's going on. This is another example, and this is a very good piece of work. Somebody's taken their time to lay this out in a clear fashion, and thought about what's going on in each process step. And here's another good example of one in a similar fashion, probably not quite as good as the previous one, but is making an attempt to try and think about the overall flow of the process. Finally, the upstream downstream network. The main issue people have with this type of piece of assessment is that it's finding the data, and it's quite tempting when you're doing it to kind of go, well, it's roughly going to be tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. These fit there, they fit there. It's broadly similar. So this is a a poor piece of work. Somebody's done, I would say, below the minimum, but I have seen worse. But this is still a fail. Okay, this is a better option. So here they've laid it out in upstream and downstream. That's fine. You can do either. There's no good and bad way of doing that. And here you can start to see some structure to the supply chain. This is another example that's got slightly more marks. And what you have to look for is there's a basic supply network, and then you have to look for where it deviates. So where, for example, here, exquisite handmade cakes sell directly to some local customers that come pick it up from the factory, for example, or people that are selling direct to Waterstones here, so they're bypassing the particular distributing section. Sometimes you'll have names for parts of the supply network. Sometimes you'll have to make assumptions. So you can see here that they've used a color code to say where they've made assumptions. And you can make some generic kind of, well, for example, I've got farmers there, and in this case we didn't tell them where the flour came from, for example. So they've worked back and made some assumptions within reason. But it is a case in the supply network of listening to the basic supply bit, and then as you listen to the other interviews and you look at the other data in the cases, finding nuggets, that all those nuggets that will add to your mark, because you're showing the particular aspects of the supply network that may be not so obvious, to get a more accurate representation of the quirks, if you like, of the supply network.